Most violence is driven by thermal reactions, rage, passion, desperation. Graham Young operated at absolute zero. He did not kill for financial gain, and he extracted no emotional satisfaction from the suffering he caused. His primary drive was data acquisition. Graham Young viewed the people in his orbit as biological hardware, awaiting a variable input. Every cup of tea was a new entry in a dataset he had been compiling since childhood. In the summer of 1971, a small British village experienced a sudden, crippling wave of illness. Residents suffered agonizing nervous system degradation. Local physicians categorized it as a mysterious, highly aggressive virus. The severe neuropathy and gastrointestinal failure spreading through the population was actually a structured toxicological trial, and the principal investigator was the man preparing the daily tea trolley. This case represents a total subversion of the scientific method. Human empathy was replaced by the methodical, chemical dismantling of a community conducted with mathematical precision. The events of 1971 required a catastrophic failure of the psychiatric establishment. 9 years earlier, at age 14, Young systematically poisoned his own family, killing his stepmother. He was committed to Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric facility. Yet in 1970, after nearly a decade of institutional observation, medical boards authorized his release. His file indicated he was fully rehabilitated. The psychiatrists built their evaluation on a flawed metric. They assessed whether his teenage obsession with chemicals had subsided, rather than testing for deep-seated psychopathic adaptation. They failed to recognize the development of a clinical mask. The rigid structure of the hospital environment did not cure his fixation. It simply trained him how to mimic rehabilitation and camouflage his true intent. Acting on this blind spot, the state legally discharged a highly organized, practicing poisoner directly back into the public sector. The irony of his release was immediately compounded by his new employment. Young secured a position as a storeman at John Hadland Limited, a specialized chemical laboratory. Institutional oversight effectively weaponized his pathology. The system handed a lethal tactician unrestricted access to the exact industrial compounds required to resume his life's work. This logistical placement provided Young with an unguarded inventory of heavy metals. This molecular model represents thallium. It is referred to in forensic literature as the poisoner's poison. In 1971, it was the perfect covert agent. Thallium is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. When introduced to the human body, it mimics essential minerals like potassium, bypassing cellular defenses. Standard autopsy protocols of the era rarely screened for it. Young utilized this element to engineer a specific methodology. It was violence rendered entirely invisible to the naked eye. He rejected massive single-dose lethality. Instead, he employed titration. He administered fractional, meticulously calibrated doses to observe exactly how much toxicity a human central nervous system could sustain before collapsing. The communal office tea trolley served as a highly efficient, socially invisible delivery mechanism. He could adjust the dosage in individual cups without raising any suspicion. When his foreman, Bob Agel, succumbed to a prolonged, agonizing organ failure, Young attended the cremation. He expressed no remorse. He simply noted to colleagues that the vacancy provided room for a new test subject. Stripping human beings of their autonomy and reducing them to dispensable test variables was the central organizing principle of his psychology. The mechanics of his operation were recorded in real time. Exhibit A is his personal ledger, commonly known as the Black Diary. It contains no confessions of guilt, only meticulous laboratory notes. To understand the severity of this disconnect, we must map his clinical annotations directly against the physiological destruction of his victims. As seen on the left, an entry dated June 21st details his focus on colleague Fred Biggs, reduced here to Subject F. The record specifies the exact milligrams of thallium administered, while the right tracks the compound entering the digestive tract. Young notes F has developed peripheral neuritis. He records this as an interesting data point. In reality, the thallium was stripping the myelin sheaths from Biggs' nerves, causing an unrelenting, burning agony throughout his extremities. The notes continue, observing hair loss beginning at the scalp. What Young records as superficial shedding is the external symptom of the heavy metal completely overwhelming cellular mitosis, leading to catastrophic internal organ failure. His documentation tracks biological responses with strict temporal precision, structuring multiple homicides into the format of a formal, peer-reviewed scientific publication. The ledger provides absolute proof that his cognitive framework was devoid of empathy. The mind executing these acts functioned strictly as a recording device for toxicological data. As the physical damage accelerated, victims were moved out of the laboratory and into clinical hospital wards. Attending physicians were entirely disoriented. Operating under the assumption of an aggressive viral outbreak, their treatment protocols were completely ineffective against heavy metal toxicity. Meanwhile, as doctors exhausted every single diagnostic possibility available, the person who had engineered the symptoms was standing silently in the room, documenting their failure to identify the compound. He did not view the hospital as a place of rescue. It was simply an extended observation deck, a secondary facility to monitor the terminal stages of his experiment. Watching the medical establishment struggle against his undetectable method validated his own sense of intellectual supremacy. This absolute detachment allowed him to operate efficiently in plain sight. However, that same supreme confidence fostered a deep arrogance, creating the single behavioral flaw that would dismantle his entire operation. The investigation pivoted when a consulting company doctor identified that the symptoms perfectly mirrored the physiological effects of heavy metal exposure. Faced with a professional who had identified the source of the illness, Young's ego overrode his discipline. He broke his masks to ask, "Why haven't you considered thallium?" It was an immediate, glaring anomaly. The toxicology of thallium is highly specialized. A standard storeroom clerk possessed no logical reason to have that specific chemical profile committed to memory. That single sentence instantly shifted the framework from a medical mystery to a criminal investigation. Detectives isolated Young as their primary suspect. Police executed a targeted search warrant on his small, unassuming living quarters, dismantling the room to locate the source of the exposure. No investigator outmaneuvered Graham Young in the field. His own pathological compulsion to prove he was the smartest person in the room fractured his operational security. Hidden securely beneath the floorboards, investigators uncovered the physical architecture of his crimes: glass vials containing pure thallium and the Black Diary. The meticulous documentation he valued above human life sealed his fate. The diary provided an unbroken forensic chain of custody, transforming a series of private laboratory notes into an airtight, handwritten confession. Young was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Upon receiving his sentence, his primary concern remained unchanged. He reportedly asked the escorting officers if his new facility would be equipped with an adequate laboratory. He died in his maximum security cell in 1990. The official cause was recorded as myocardial infarction, though forensic historians continue to debate whether the toxicologist chose to conduct one final, lethal experiment on his own biology. The physical evidence remains securely archived. The critical question is whether institutional psychiatry is finally equipped to identify these specific psychological anomalies before they iterate. Graham Young pursued absolute, emotionless control over human biology. In the end, the extreme clinical detachment required to run his trials produced the exact forensic data required to lock him away forever.